Moving on to the next example, this one we're going to be careful with, and we could have talked about in the last one, but it didn't come up. But we know, we just mentioned we can't take square roots of negatives. And when we have variables, we don't know if this x stands for a positive or a negative. So we need to be careful of that. So let's start with this. The square root of 25 is definitely 5. And we might think, well, actually we'll go ahead and write this out. This is 5 squared. And then we have all these x squareds to get us to 14, which would be 7 of them. Which when we take this, this is 5 x x x x x x x, so that's x seventh. And so we can think, well, that's our answer, but we have to be careful with this because if x were negative 2, x to the 7th would be a negative number. And we can't say the square root of some number is a negative number. It's got to be a positive number unless it has like the plus or a minus out here. So it can't be a negative number. So what we have to do is we have to put an absolute value here around x to the 7th. And that happens, the only time you have to do that is if you're taking the square root or the 4th root of 6, an even root of something, and your answer is an odd exponent. And we have to do that because we're not sure if x is positive or negative. And so if we have an odd, a negative, this could be an odd number, which is impossible to have an odd number. So when you are taking square roots or 4th roots, we need to make sure once we simplify, if we have an odd exponent in our answer, we have to put absolute value around that to make sure it doesn't end up being a negative number. Next one, we have a negative out front here, so our answer is going to be negative. 7 squared, y squared, and then we would have z squared. We would have 6 of these things because we're trying to get to 12th. And so here we have negative, square root of 7 squared is 7, y, and that's an odd, so we have to make sure we put an absolute value around that. Let's look through the rest of these. We have z, 6 of them. Now the only one we don't have to put absolute value around this because even if this was a negative to an even power is going to be positive, so we need to put absolute value of y here. Again, because it's y to the 1st, and if you have an odd in there and we had an even index, it was a 2, so the index was even, we have to put absolute value. All right, this next one, we can think of 16. Let's think through here. We can think that is 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, so 1/2 to the 4th. We want a 4th, so we could write r to the 4th, r to the 4th, and then s cubed minus 8. Sorry, I wrote that in the exponent, x squared minus 8, x cubed minus 8. And how many of these will we have? So I don't really want to write all these, so let's think through something else that I don't have to write s cubed minus 8 a bunch of times. So here's a 20. I want s cubed minus 8 to the 4th, and then that would get me to 4, and then I would want an s cubed minus 8, another 4 of them, which would get me to 8. How many do I need to get to 20? Maybe I will write this just to point out this idea here. This can save us some time as we work through. This is a 4. One, two, three, 4, and we need one more. I don't know, maybe some of you picked this out already. This is also a 4. Now we can work through here. 4th root of 1/2 to the 4th is 1/2. Here's an r times an r. And here we have this 5 times. So we can say s cubed minus 8 to the 5th. Now, with this, instead of writing all of this stuff here, we could have written this. We know we want s cubes minus 8 to the 4th. And we could have thought, well, how many of these do we have? So we could raise that to the 5th power. And that's where this 5 comes from. Now, finishing off here, we have 1/2 r squared. We don't have to put absolute value around r squared, because if r was negative, squaring it would still make it positive. We do, however, need to put absolute value around the s cubed minus 8, because that is raised to the 5th power. You can write this a couple different ways. We can take the absolute value of it first and then just take it to the 5th power, because that will make any negative number that ends up being in there, it will make it positive. And so there's the answer to that one.